How have your holidays been, my friend?
Good, good. Busy as the case may be.
Hmm.
Um, I was here in New York for the whole stretch from Christmas Eve through today and singing at Trinity for all of that. And we pared down our normal offerings because of the changing, status on the ground here. But we did
Hmm.
have the youth pageant and then a later evening service with all of the music, and then we had Sunday morning. We had Christmas morning and then Sunday morning. So it's been a
Oh,
lot of
all
church.
three. That's a lot.
How about you?
I had my last concert on the 23rd, so that was fun. This year, I gave myself the holiday proper off from church work. I just thought, our daughter's first Christmas comes once, and I wanted to be present for that. I think also it's interesting, Jonathan, like the different waves of the virus, I think are hitting areas of the country at different paces.
Sure.
So here, definitely the mask mandate indoors is back,
Okay.
and there's a sense of escalation because the viral spread is definitely growing. But at the same time, all of the concerts went forward, even with full
Mm,
forces, with full orchestra.
mm,
So I did have that strange feeling in my bones, like, oh, when will be the next time that I will experience this?
yeah.
But it was also sweet. It was like festive and got me in a holiday mood in a way that was not taken for granted this year. So, but I'm
Yeah.
glad for the
I can so
downtime
relate to
now.
that. Yeah, I can relate to both of those things. I mean, I don't know if this has been happening on the West Coast, but like the last few projects here, people on the project started testing positive. And I feel like that has been the root of why so many folks are deciding to either cancel or postpone or restructure. Is like if it's spreading through the ensemble, like it does seem really irresponsible to keep going.
It does,
Um,
much as we might want to.
so, I was just saying to Kelvin before you jumped on, like part of it feels a little bit like March 2020 again, and like looking down the barrel of are we going to be indoors for another month? Um, And I'm of
Yes.
actually two minds about that. On the one hand, like maybe what we need as a society is to hibernate for a month every year at Christmas time.
Yeah,
you know,
certainly. Hmm.
having a chance to actually slow down, actually not pile more things on, because it's the holidays. Um, I don't know. I mean, I don't wish hardship on anybody, certainly economically or otherwise, but you
Hmm.
know, if this virus becomes endemic and we have to face it year after year, it might always play out this way.
It might, and we might be able to mitigate that if we're more cautious now. What is the other mindset?
Oh well, just that you just yeah that just that same fear of oh how when are we going to have the opportunity to perform again and when is it going to feel safe? Um,
Yeah.
and it does seem like Omicron's a little different in that more people are catching it, but it's less people are having a bad time with it.
Agreed. It's
So
strange to process because on the one hand the wave is more intense because I know more people really nationwide but especially here in the Bay who have the virus now than I ever have before.
mhm.
And at the same time we're all vaccinated and many of us are boosted and that sort of softens the impact.
Mhm.
But actually more than a little bit. But at the same time, if we're looking at sheltering at home again for a while, I'm the same as you. I feel so eager to be about my work in 2022, and at the same time, if 1 or 2 months of caution and homestaying are what we need to shorten this wave, then maybe that's what we should do. And then I venture into this like semi-familiar land where I'm like, well, slowing down has its pluses. Like I started an herbal garden, which has been like a lifelong adult fantasy that I never had enough time for.
Mhm. That's so
Yeah,
nice.
it's really nice. Just have a little like basil and mint.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's amazing how cathartic it was, especially in 2020, just to have little growing things in the corner,
Hmm.
you know.
I've always felt that I have too much of a black thumb to do anything like that, but I've always imagined how nice it would be to, reach over. Oh, I need a little time. Oh, I'll just pluck a sprig. Oh, some cilantro. Oh, there's a little bit of that. Oh, here's some parsley. Like how lovely is that?
It's really lovely. Well, your plant in the window looks very robust.
I think I've got enough, touch up my appearance on that it's touching up the appearance of
The
the
plants.
house. She does need some water. After we get off this phone call, I'm gonna give her a little bit of water. She can perk up those leaves.
That's hilarious that the look enhancer enhances plants.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a nice feature, a nice added feature.
Amazing. Well, I was just thinking back about how like the range of feelings that I had when the pandemic first descended and trying to remember when our QVL community started, whether it essentially coincided with the beginning of the pandemic or whether we
I think it was
started
a
it
little later.
was a
I
little a
feel
few months
like
after.
I feel like we started, yeah. Kelvin had started reaching out to people before the pandemic, and then it kind of coalesced. It was a couple of months in, wasn't it?
I think it was. I think it was, now that I think back. But in a way, it feels a little serendipitous that Kelvin and Kathy were starting this, not necessarily for the purpose that it's ended up serving,
Hmm.
which is multifaceted, of course. But um, I don't know. There were some days when I feel like our conversations were just this little, first of all, just a structured thing in an otherwise formless day at home,
Yep.
you know, not meaningless. But of course, we were all doing some virtual work at the time. But especially in those first few months when I think the shock phase was at a peak,
Yeah.
um, it was just so comforting to come to the space and just be how I needed to be.
I felt that way as well. And particularly for me, it was the the familiar faces. Coming
Mhm.
every couple of weeks and just seeing people that you that you know, that you love, that you remember spending time with in the real world. And when we didn't have access to, being able to share the same space physically, just seeing everybody's face for me was really reassuring.
Mhm.
Um, and just this opportunity to engage in a makeshift community, um,
Mhm.
as the case may be. And yeah, I mean, I think we were all looking for, we were all experiencing that kind of, as you said, when you said formless, I think that's a really great word for what it felt like. It was like we had time to fill. There were certainly things one could do to fill that time, but it was
Mhm.
like what was worth doing.
What's
Um,
worth doing?
and this felt like something that became worth doing pretty quickly.
It
Um,
did. It
so
did.
that,
And
yeah, that was something for me. Yeah.
I hear you on recognizing the faces and having muscle memory of being in the company of most of the artists in our circle. That was meaningful. I think especially because I don't know, I felt unmoored with respect to the profession
Hmm.
quite a bit that year, and this past year too. I'm sure we all have. It's like a very changeable sense of belonging in the work and estrangement from the work, at least for me. And also thinking about, well, if I want to be doing other things with my time alongside my personal life, then what do I want to be doing? And I felt like this was a safe space to explore my sense of belonging as an artist and kind of remember what that's like in community. I think that was really comforting, like on a lot
Yeah.
of days where I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, right, I do actually have this career and I've made music in a meaningful way with so many of these people. And I don't know, it felt like that reflected back some part of my identity that I sometimes felt was lost.
Yeah. and understandably so. I mean, I mean, even in a home and family life that's, really affirming and supportive, how do you get that without actually going out and being at rehearsal, or being in a coaching, or actually having those moments where you're doing what you do and it's bouncing off of other people. I mean, that's as
Hmm.
much a part of doing what we do as preparing our individual practice and our musical work, like at home. It's like you have to take it out in order for it to actually mean something, at least.
Yeah.
Maybe I should only speak for myself, but I feel like we all kind of relate to that a little bit.
Definitely. Definitely. I think for a while, when it was novel, to be honest, that the sort of like invitation to joy in practice was really welcome. It was refreshing. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, so I don't have extrinsic motivation. Probably that's really healthy, and I can come back to the process. And actually, in a lot of ways and on a lot of days, I found joy just in the craft, just getting back to breathing. And also, it was cool to have the bandwidth to get back to some kind of training stuff. Like, I did an
Sure.
online Feldenkrais workshop that
Oh,
I
wow.
never would have been able to find time and space for. Also, I think it was like a fraction of the original cost, and I attended some festivals and some master classes that I never would have been able to see,
Hmm.
that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But I don't know. What another thing about QVL that was comforting was being able to debrief about the world of digital performance, such as it is, or like becoming our own audio engineers, and like how dark that world sometimes
Yeah.
got.
Yeah. We all really struggled with that. I think every single one of us at some point really did have a hard time with turning a process that's so communal into a process that was so presentational.
Mm,
um, where we're all we can offer from what we bring to the table is this little square box with our heads in it.
right?
And, you know, when it's a camera and, a microphone, that captures something, but it doesn't, I don't think, captures the real truth of the experience of making music or even of listening to music.
Hmm.
And I feel like that was super jarring
Hmm.
to go from being able to do it the real way to then having to produce an equivalent that was missing so much that
Yes.
was integral, and
Yes.
to what makes music meaningful.
Yes, yes, especially the chance to just breathe together in real time and be
Hmm.
in your body and in your space in that moment. There's just no substitute for that. And I think maybe this was naive, but I think for me, some of the whiplash of going from live performance to performing at home, as it were, invited, I don't know, a search for some of the same rewards as we
Hmm.
find in live performance. And of course, I didn't really find them because the medium is totally different. And
Yeah.
for whatever reason, that was a period of an adjustment for me when it was just dawning on me that I didn't maybe need to keep looking for that because it was sort of futile and a little bit painful. And if I just sort of accepted that that part of my life was going to be dormant for a while, and if I started thinking about honestly what we were doing as more like film, more like performing on film, and
Sure.
embrace it as a totally new medium, I think then it started to have a vitality for me that was exciting and more
Okay.
uplifting. But I needed the grieving first. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm not sure I ever got to that acceptance stage. I was
Oh, really?
definitely in anger, definitely in bargaining, probably in denial orbit. I'm not sure I got to acceptance. Um, so, more power to you. One thing I actually wanted to ask you, because one of the other things that kind of coincided time wise with our getting involved with QVL was, of
Mhm.
course, June 2020, the protest movements
Yeah.
surrounding George Floyd and the larger, I guess, just sense that a lot of people had of being fed up with the status quo in a lot of different ways. And I feel like, and we watched that ripple through our industry, and we were able to work through that together in QVL,
Hmm.
which for me that was such a godsend,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
I really struggled during that time with understanding what my place and my role and my protests sort of could be and should be, and
Yes.
being able to talk to all of you about that really, I'm not sure what would have happened if I didn't have that opportunity. So I'm wondering if those same effects were happening for you.
They were. They were. Many layers of what you just described. One, the catharsis of having a place where we could speak openly about it, from the whole range of feeling, from empowerment to overwhelm and every shading in between. I remember, in fact, hearing you speak about all of the invitations you were getting, both for creative work and for sort of guest speaking, as it were. And
Hmm.
I also was sort of inundated with them. That's not an overstatement. And I don't know, Jonathan, it was really complex emotionally because it's a strange thing when it's tangled up together, you know?
Yep.
A spotlight shown on your work and your merits and your years and years of dedication to the craft is a good thing, right?
Yep. Yep.
But when it coincides with this super intense and kind of emotionally heavy laden role as a spokesperson, especially because we're not new to the work, you know, like
Right.
we're visible artists, we're somewhat established in the
Yep.
music world. That can feel really pressured and it can be very hard to extricate ourselves from when we need a break.
Hmm.
And I felt like I could voice that, which is to say, the breaking point
Hmm.
and how overwhelmed I felt in this space in a way that I couldn't share anywhere else. And that was really meaningful. And I loved the intersectionality of our conversations. You know, we talked about what was going on in the Asian American community. We talked about your and mine and Deshawn's experience at the height of the protest last summer, but also in the aftermath, which had a little bit of postpartum, if you will,
Hmm.
feelings for me.
Totally. Yeah.
Because there's the part of me that's like, well, this movement is like an ongoing call to action. This is not like summer of 2020 that thing happened.
Right.
This is like the beginning of America's belated truth and reconciliation process is what this is like the first super painful uh, growing pains of
Yep.
what it means to tell the truth about how our country came to be. So I don't know. I think it's fraught for me, that place, when I try to embrace it all at once. So one thing I've learned is that it's okay to compartmentalize and or to work in one space at once, and also that that's the only thing that's realistic for me as one person.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of cool to like think about the work differently, you know, from our project at Opera Lafayette, and kind of like coming to a, a concept that felt considered and well curated, a version of this conversation that we're trying to forge, you know, between the visible masters and the less visible masters. It's like, how do
Hmm.
we make that bridge? So that was one project that's done it. And I do feel like, I don't know, maybe the most wonderful thing about some of these virtual projects is that they've been a way to create that bridge in a space that invited artists and thinkers from all over the world, and
Yep.
that's been kind of cool,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely.
But I do find myself, and I am very curious how you're feeling at this juncture of like reentry or something like reentry. Uh, I feel called to the work differently, and I devote a lot more of my career and work energy toward representation on the stage than I did before. I think that portion was growing before the pandemic, but it's really increased a lot, I think, in response to that calling. And I wonder, how you're feeling, like about your palette of work and that calling and other callings and.
Yeah, I very similar to what you're saying, and a lot of what you described is like spot on. You know, it's actually been really interesting in the very recent past, like the last few months.
Hmm.
I almost feel like there's become a shorthand uh, in some of our spaces, and particularly with organizations that I've worked with a lot over the years. And so they know me and I know them. There's almost this shorthand where it's like my presence checks the diversity box. And I know it's not being done per se out of um out of like laziness or anything like that. I just think it's kind of how human beings operate. It's like we're
Mm,
presented with a challenge, and
mm,
then we need to find the measurable, you know, ways in which you can tackle that challenge. And so if the challenge is like how can early music, choral music, classical music be, more diversified, be more
mhm,
representative, I think for a lot of people, it's really easy to, the low hanging fruit is, okay, let's take our black artist and like make sure that they're front and center. And
yes.
like, and a lot of organizations have done that. And we are the artists who are now kind of front and center.
Hmm.
Um, and it's like, it's complicated. Um, because on the one hand, that is, yeah, perhaps part of a solution.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but I also don't think it necessarily means that the systemic factors that led to the lack of representation in the first place are solved, because I don't think that they are. And I'm finding lately that the conversation has veered a little bit away from taking a more extensive and examined look at those systemic factors. It's just I think it's hard for people to live there all the time. Which
Yes.
and as you alluded to a little bit with, for us who
Mm.
live lives as Black people, as people of color, we can't live there all the time because you have to live, you have to live. um, but so when it's organizations, I think the challenge is a little different because it's lots of minds and lots of bodies, ideally all coming together to tackle this challenge. But
Hmm.
sometimes organizations kind of have that same, um, let's say, oh, exhaustion, overwhelm, as you put it,
Mm.
as far
Mm.
as tackling like real equity. And so to loop back to answering your question, I've noticed I've started to keep a little running tally of like when I just get kind of shorthanded for diversity. And it happened recently
Really?
with a colleague who is a great friend and who, you know, they were interested in me perhaps composing something for their group. And it's like, well, we wanted to make sure we had a composer of color. And so we thought of you. And it's like, that's really like, I understand where they're coming from. I know it's not meant to be offensive in any way. I know, in fact, it's meant to signal respect, and yet it does also signal, oh yeah, box checking.
It does. Oh.
um, and so, yeah, so I think that's where I am. It's like,
Hmm.
how much of what I do now is checking boxes for folks?
Mm.
Um, Even if in being given the opportunity to do that, I am happy with the work I've done and with some of the work I've created. I mean, I have had the opportunity to create some new pieces of music that I've not seen anybody else tackle in the classical music
Hmm.
space. And to me,
Yes.
that does feel like I'm doing my best to add something to this conversation that's meaningful. Um,
Yes.
and but if I'm only given that opportunity because someone on a board feels that they need more diversity, there's there are pluses and minuses.
There are. There are. Well, and also for the record, you've been about the work for a while, pre-pandemic, and it's just been an honor to sing some of your work that speaks to these themes, and it will always be an honor. And I know that
Thank you,
you've been
Michelle.
about the work, like no matter folks' motivation for hiring you, like that dedication is just a through line in your work, you know? It's just important to celebrate. I do your tally that you're keeping kind of fascinates me. How will you say more? Are you tallying like just the events that feel that way, or also how you feel about them?
It's just more the events that feel that way. And when I say tally, I mean I'm not necessarily sort of keeping a list of names.
Uh-huh.
It's just more clocking when that happens
I
and
see.
noticing like, oh yeah, okay, that's still a little bit not quite. That's still missing the point a little bit. And it's I guess for me, what that just means is it just reminds me that these conversations need to keep going. That we haven't quite gotten to the well, I don't think we're going to get to the answer because I don't think there is one answer. Um, and so yeah, um, I'm sorry if that was a really long-winded
No,
way
it's
of answering your
fascinating.
question.
It's fascinating. I have like a lot of responses to it, and I also can relate to pretty much every aspect of what you're describing. Not as much, compositionally, but just creatively. And one theme that strikes me is one we've talked about a lot in QVO, which is like the impact of capitalist thinking, capitalist systems, pressure always to be producing and productive, to sort of be in a hurry
Yeah,
all the time, as it were. And I feel like the pattern you're describing of this sort of like cursory, whether it's box checking or just a sense like, oh, good, this will get the work done. Gotta move the, you know what I mean? That which is in fact harmful, which has a very harmful impact, no matter how altruistic the intention behind it. And I like that we've been able to kind of like dissect and vent about those patterns in QVO because they're so real, and especially at this time when I think scarcity mentality is kind of at an all-time high
yeah,
for understandable reasons. There's this weird rub I think between this systemic reckoning and the call to the work against that scarcity mentality. And when those two meet, it can be pretty bittersweet and pretty intense. And it runs into another intersection that I know I have brought up at QVL, hopefully for compelling reason, because I don't mean to be a broken record, but I just notice this time and again, Jonathan, is like this effort to center the voices of artists of color, which is definitely at an all-time high in my personal experience, and I think is on balance a good thing. It's that effort when it comes up against this, I think, still pretty fledgling commitment to the work of anti racism and the training and the daily internalization of that work and what it looks like for organizations, right? It's when the centering of artists of color comes up against the need to cultivate that work that all of a sudden the artists of color are doing the work.
right, right.
And I bring it up because it happens all the time. And then we come up against that place that you were describing where we're exhausted, like from the outset.
Yeah,
And it's not at all from a lack of commitment to the work. It's from the saturation of being expected to do it all the time.
mhm,
To embody it, to be a leader, to be a spokesperson like that. That's a finite place to be, right? We can't be that all the time. And so for me, that's a real challenge. It's probably the main challenge of this place right now is like owning my own limits
mhm.
and knowing when to say no, you know? Um, I've always struggled with that because, like you, like I'm a diplomatic person. I value my colleagues in my workplaces. I am loyal to my employers. And I don't know, that can be a complex feeling thing.
I hear Audra in the background. I hope
Yeah,
she's doing
she's
okay
hungry. She's
without
hungry.
her mommy for a little while. But we, we can I suppose we could wrap this up. I mean, I'm not sure how long we were meant to speak for. Um, I mean, I of course could talk to you all day, but
Yeah, likewise.
I know you've. I know I don't want to keep you from your little one. Um,
Oh, thank you. Benjamin is with her, so I think she'll
okay,
be okay.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, I do
Um,
wonder
yeah.
on this same theme, like how you're feeling about those invitations. Like, how do you prioritize the work that you really want to say yes to, that you really feel is worthy of your time and efforts, given that, thankfully, we have an abundance of work to choose from, right?
Right.
That's a gift, but it
That is a
also
gift.
comes with a lot of this kind of intense, heavy laden work. So how are those choices feeling for you?
You know, one thing I'm realizing is everything I do, I find can't necessarily be about really serious subjects. You know, I'm finding that I have to take, uh, I have to kind of balance work if I'm going to tackle something really serious. And
Hmm.
then, you know, maybe if I, let's say I have two composition projects kind of cooking at the same time, if one of them is about a really serious subject matter, then the other one needs to be about, you know, like rivers or something. Like it just needs to
Yeah.
totally be about something that I don't have skin in the game, or that the idea isn't to create conversation or disrupt, you know, audience expectations. Like I think kind of trying to spend too much time worrying about the impact can actually, for me, pull me away from being able to do something successfully.
Mm.
I sort of have to concentrate more on the process
Hmm.
and uh, and just let, you know, when in the case of composition, like, you know, let the piece of music kind of speak to me and come from where it's going to come from. And then even in the case of singing, you know, I think it's a similar thing. It's like I've got to balance projects that are, um, you know, that are maybe a little more lucrative, but a little less satisfying, with
Mm.
ones where I'm really going to get something out of it musically, or because of the colleagues I'm with, or because of the place we're going. You know,
Hmm.
even if at the end of the day, like the dollar amount is not as high, like I will agree with you that like I feel very grateful to have the opportunity, you know, to choose, and to not always, you know, be in the scarcity model of like take the thing that pays the best, take the thing, you know, that gives you the best bang for your buck. And I,
Yes.
you know, and I know that I was there for a period of time professionally, and
Hmm.
it's been really interesting to, one of the two sides of the COVID coin. It's like on the other
Hmm.
side,
Yes.
I also feel like I have more agency as an artist than I did before this pandemic.
Yes.
So, you know, it's that mixed blessing of like, okay, now I actually can be a little more discerning, you know, but that's a blessing. And I know that not everybody is finds themselves in that position, you know, at any given moment. um
Yes. Oh, I hear
so
that.
again, I try to feel a sense of like, you know, on the one hand responsibility, but then on the other hand, you know, it's like, yeah, it's doing what is also going to keep you alive, as you mentioned when we started this conversation, just what's going to keep you in a sense of finding meaning in this work. Because I think if you go too far in one direction and you lose that, then
Mm.
that's when you're in trouble.
Yes, especially if you lose the levity. Oh, I hear that.
Hmm.
I hear that really deeply. And I love what you said about having more agency as an artist. I do think, like, on a systemic level, that a fascinating thing about the pandemic is that it basically like overturned the hierarchy, in that the largest organizations that tend to dominate every field, right, by definition, were the least nimble. You
Yep.
know, like they did not know how to pivot through the portal, if not for the
Yep.
most part. Whereas, you know, your little like scrappy opera companies and little chamber ensembles and inventive choruses, can figure out, okay, we need to pivot full scale right now. So how can we remain vital? And those are the organizations that have shown, through the pandemic. And there's something to be said for that. I think also on the scale of the individual artist that it's been a pretty empowering time, notwithstanding that it's also been a time of scarcity for so many, and there are many, many governmental shortfalls. I feel like a lot
Yeah.
of us would agree,
Yeah.
um, that haven't helped all that much. So it does feel like a relative luxury that you and I have had enough work to sustain our profession, frankly, let alone to be in like a dynamic place where we can feel like we're in the driver's seat of our career as opposed to
Hmm.
just coasting somewhere.
Along for the
Um,
ride.
Along for the ride, yeah. Steve
Yeah.
and I have for years spoken about our career in those terms and said, will you help me see when I fall into the passenger seat? Like
Mm.
I don't want to be reactive in my career. I want always to be driving it. And if that means something else needs to shift in order for me to be doing that, then let it be. Maybe I take another job for a while. I figure out how I need to extricate myself from some toxic spaces or
Yeah.
whatever. You know what I mean? Um, I love that. I also
I love
love,
that too. Yeah, that's amazing.
it's important, you know and it can be hard even though we realize rationally, of course I know better. you know um, the There's one other thing that you said that really strikes me. Well, actually several things, but this one in particular, like, I think one of the most profound learnings for me over this past year and a half has been what uh, what slowing down can do for my internal life. And maybe that sounds like a little bit simplistic or something, but it hasn't felt simplistic. It's felt
Okay.
like paring down my life, my daily rhythm, being forced to, of course, but then learning how to assert some agency over how I'm spending that time
Yeah.
has like taught me a lot about meditation, about reading, about reflection, about my inward life and what happens when it has a much bigger space in my
Hmm.
life. And I think that that has been like a really, really intense gift for me, particularly at the end of my mother's life last year. Honestly, Jonathan, I don't know what I would have done without all that space to grieve and to be with her, to be with my family with
Yeah.
zero pressure to be working. I mean, with respect to that personal situation, the way we were living was a great blessing.
Yeah.
And I'll always be grateful to hospice and also to those circumstances for giving me that space. And I think also it kind of changed me. It changed the way that I think about grief, the impact that grief has on my work. I think I used to feel shameful or apologetic about grief and
Hmm.
painful stuff,
Hmm.
um, or like it needed to be rose tinted or just moved through really quickly. I think a lot of artists feel that way. I think especially a lot of POC feel that way, and I think especially that a lot of women of color feel
Yeah.
that way because there's so much noise in the world about how we're caretakers and we're noble and we're very, very resilient.
Right.
And I don't mean to be
Right.
flip about any of those qualities, but I think you know what I mean. Like
I absolutely know what you mean.
that's a pretty narrow box. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it doesn't really have any room for pain or anger or leisure. And this is like the one of the big learnings is I love how you're talking about like bringing joy and levity, or whether it's the natural world or humor or whatever, into your compositional work. I think we all need that so much. And like the I think of the nap ministry. Like the revelation that black people, that especially all people of color and really all people need and deserve rest.
Yeah.
I wish that that weren't a revelation, but it kind of is. And I think also that out of rest comes more joy, at least for me. Is like, oh well, I'm here in this moment in my life. Like I'm not churning, thinking back, churning,
Mm-hmm.
thinking forward. I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually right here, which means I'm like ready to laugh with my friends, with my daughter, with myself, and that's just something I want to keep honoring, no matter what it takes.
Yeah. That's so beautiful, Michelle. And I would also just love to say that your journey in processing your grief and in taking space to do that and in sharing the space with us in QVL, at times, um, has been incredibly inspirational. And also, I've learned from it, um, because I think I can absolutely relate to, certain ideas about whether you're supposed to express pain, as a person of color.
Oh my God.
And there's it's documented. I mean, hospitals, doctors, like there are, these ideas are built into the way people, practice medicine, among many other things. It's like this idea. So many people just don't think that Black folks experience pain, or particularly emotional pain, or if we do, that we can just sort of sing and dance it away. And and your willingness to be vulnerable with us, if I may say, and sort of show that you are learning how to process it with each passing day, is kind of like, yeah, that's real. That's real life. um, and it's something that we all experience, in some form or fashion, or will experience, one day or another,
Mhm.
and to share, what we've all gone through in the QVL community, like, and hear each person's story, and particularly each person when they've been willing to risk vulnerability. um it's like that helps us all. We all get a one, additional little arrow in the quiver, as far as like how to grieve, and how to face challenges, how to
Mm.
face loss. So
Mhm.
thank you for your leadership, because I think you have led in this group, at least there, like in
Mm.
that space. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. That's really meaningful to me. I also, I've learned from you, and I have especially appreciated how you've talked about, like what you're done with, like when a line has been crossed, and you're like, "Are you kidding me?" And I just like those moments are so vivid to me because I think you've like been about your boundaries, and or at least like known how to talk about them when you're struggling with them,
Hmm.
which of course we all do. And I admire your open-heartedness about that, and I especially love how you've been able to let in all of your feelings about it, especially when you're angry about it. When you're like,
Hmm.
hey, like this was a violation of me
Hmm.
and what I stand for, and I especially when it flirts with that dangerous ground, right? This
Yeah.
is a loaded word, but it's shorthand. Like when we feel tokenized, like,
Hmm.
and we've learned that we don't need to put up with that shit. Like, you
Yeah.
better watch out. You better watch
Yeah.
out. Like we probably we're gonna walk away ultimately, but
Yeah.
first we're gonna let you know what we think and why that's not okay. And I don't think that was a lesson that I had learned before. So thank you for bringing it to light.
Oh, I appreciate it. And, it's interesting. I feel like it's a lesson that some of the elders in my life tried to teach me for a long time. And I think before the pandemic, well, I'll say actually sort of before the election of the 45th president, uh, I had maybe a slightly different idea about what the best way was to solve some of these conflicts.
Mm.
And I'm a Libra, and I love the idea of reconciliation and of hearing. as many points of view as possible.
Hmm.
But sometimes, as you so astutely put it, you just know what you can't stand for anymore, what you can't put up with anymore. And I do think that part of it was the added stress of a pandemic situation and a lockdown situation and a career, reevaluation and all of those things. Um, and also the protests. I think that did, for me, absolutely, it played a role in realizing that, I'm not alone out there, that there are so many people who have been putting up with stuff for a while now and are just done with it.
Mm.
And I don't just mean with respect to race. I think one of the reasons these protests were so widespread is because so many people could see in their own lives what they had been putting up with that they were done with.
Mm.
Even if it was just bad management from the boss, or, too much sexism at work, or too much homophobia, or, just not being treated with the respect that being a human
Mm.
affords. Like, every single person deserves to be treated with respect. And I think we kind of all had this awakening of like, there's just so much about our society that does not center people and treat people with respect. And starting to just call that out when I see it and when we all see it. I don't know. There was just something about all of those factors that made it like, why hold back any longer?
Why hold back? Oh, that's a profound thing. I
Mm-hmm.
love it. Also, the coincidence between the protests and the pandemic, I think, is non-accidental, right? Like
Yeah,
this historic trope, like when working folks have the luxury of time, but people rise up, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I love what you described, and it makes me like zoom out a little and appreciate that I've been able to enter into, I guess, virtual spaces, but real feeling spaces, QVL, and other spaces like led by artists of color, where these things are articulated and where I feel seen on just a different level than I ever have felt seen in my life. And it makes me feel able to speak up more about
mhm,
identity related stuff, about misogyny, about racism, about systemic ills that I think I have not always known how to talk about. And of course, I'm still learning how to talk about, but I've begun. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
I don't feel as fearful about calling out injustice, whether it's systemic or personal or something in between. And also, I just am psyched about these spaces
yeah,
where we can be frank, we can just bring whatever state we're in that day. And QVL is so beautiful that way. It's like we've brought grief, we brought rage, we brought humor.
mhm,
We can pretty much just bring whatever the day calls for and trust that we're going to feel seen. And that's a transformative thing.
absolutely, absolutely. And I guess my hope is just that QVL can be a model for more, because I think so many people need this, within our profession, but then also in the wider kind of community of folks living in the 21st century. It's like we no longer are bound by physical restrictions. I get to have a conversation with you in New York while you're in California.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, yeah, innovative ways of taking advantage of that, innovative ways of finding out how to connect and how to feel safe around each other. QVL is a great example of that. So I hope more folks follow in this example.
I
Yeah,
hope so too. And I'm so glad it's given us a chance to just hang out and talk. It's
yeah.
just it's a delight. And I also hope that we can be somewhere together in person before too long.
I hope so too. I hope so too. Before too long, and because of course I'd love to meet little Audra May. She's growing up so fast already.
She
You
is.
know,
She is. Oh
she's
my
gonna be
goodness.
nearly grown by the time I get a chance to see her.
Well,
I hope that's not really true, but
I hope we
I
can
still
see
like to
each
see the
other
little
sooner.
baby version.
Of course, of course. Well, we have plans to come east. Oh, I have pretty near-term plans to come east and perform. I think maybe with you, kaleidoscope stuff.
Right.
Um,
Yes, with the stuff at the end of this month.
yes,
And
so
so fingers crossed that that all. Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
it's bizarre. I honestly, it could go either way,
Hmm.
So we'll see. But if not, then I think in March, actually, our whole family will be out east. Spirit willing, if that is what the universe wants to have happen, we'll be there. But yeah, in the meantime, it's really wonderful to talk.
Likewise, likewise. Thanks for a great convo today.